Hey guys, it's Mr. Gagnon, and we're starting our physics unit. But before we get into the actual physics, we need to understand that math is a super important part of this whole semester. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to assume that you know the math first, because in the past what's happened is if I assume that you know the math, then then you'll have trouble for the semester. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start you all off on the same page, and we're going to look at some of the math techniques used to solving for our physics. Okay, so I'm not going to get into what physics is. We'll get into that in class, and you'll be able to see what it is, but let's talk just about the math. So let's look at a simple equation. So we're going to say, we'll call this solving for a variable. Okay, let's look at a simple equation first, something that looks like, and don't worry what they mean. We don't need to know that. S is d over t. Okay, the variables in this equation are S, D, and T. And it just happens to be that that's speed, distance, and time. So when we say we're solving for a variable, it means by having it alone on the left side. So this form of the equation, the S is on the left side, and it's all alone. Okay, and a simple fact to remember, there are some rules. So to undo a mathematical operation, you've got to do the same thing to both sides to make it equal. It's almost like a seesaw. So just look at this as a picture. If I add 1 to this side, this is going to start tipping. If you look at it as a seesaw. Okay, there's an S on this side and a D over T on this side. If I put like a +1 over here, the seesaw is now going to tip and it's not going to be equal. Okay, we want to keep this seesaw equal and level. So what I do to one side, I got to do to the other side. Okay, it's pretty simple when you think about it in terms of this, because 1 and 1 on this side will keep this seesaw from rocking one way or the other. So let's solve this equation here. Let's get rid of that. Let's solve this equation for D. Okay, we're going to isolate the D and get it on the left side. So to do that, I've got to do something to both sides. Now, in math class, you learned that to undo division, you multiply. So I've got this little t hanging out here I want to get rid of. So I'm going to multiply both sides by t. So see how I multiplied this side by t? Now, if you think about it in terms of a seesaw, you've got to do it to the other side to balance the seesaw out. So by multiplying the right side by t, it cancels that out. And the left side, we're left with t times s. So t times s equals d. So we actually also know from math that we can flip these around and say that d equals, and we can flip these around, s times t. Now, in elementary school and possibly even middle school, you might have done this whole triangle thing where you cover up one of the sides, speed, distance, and time, and you find that. Yes, that's useful, but as we start getting into the physics, you've got to learn to actually do the actual algebra to solve for the variable. So we went ahead and solved for the distance. Okay, so let's solve for, we've got for D, we solve for D, S, now we're going to solve for T. Okay, so we're going to get T by itself on both sides. There's a couple things we can do, but when I look at it, I say, well, let's do this first. Let's multiply both sides by T. Okay, T. And get rid of it on that side. So what I have left is my original formula. Distance is speed times time. You can switch these two. They're communicative. Now I'm going to get T by itself. Well, I got an S attached to it by multiplication. So if I'm multiplied, I'm going to now divide to get rid of that. So whoop, that cancels, and what I'm left with is T is equal to distance D over speed. So what I've done is I found the three ways to solve for each of these variables. So you're going to have to develop that skill. Okay, guys, so now let's look at one that's a little bit harder. A little bit more involved here. So we're going to take V is V, we call that initial velocity. Now we're going to treat that as like together with the V. So it's V naught, it's called, plus AT. Okay, so we're going to see if we can solve for this variable, the V, we'll call it V naught. Okay, that's initial velocity. And not that we have to memorize these yet, but this is just to get us to rearrange these formulas. So let's do it. Now, I got to get this by itself, and it's not. It's added, you're adding an AT to it. So to get rid of the AT, you're going to subtract an AT from both sides. So let's clean it up a little bit. If I subtract an AT from this side, then it's gone. Okay, so what I have left on the left side is V minus AT, because I subtracted the AT, is V O, of initial velocity. Again, these are connected, so you don't have to worry about separating those. So let's just flip her around a little bit, okay, and clean it up. Initial velocity is V minus AT. So what I've done is I've just rearranged the formula to solve for this variable. Okay, so let's take that same formula that we had, okay, which was V is V naught plus AT, and let's solve for A. Okay, this is where it becomes a little more difficult because I've got a T attached to the A. But let's keep in mind that the T is attached by multiplication. Okay, so let's do what we need to do. We need to get rid of all the extraneous things from this first. So I see this V naught here. I'm going to subtract that from this side and also subtract that from that side. So on the left, what I have left is V minus V naught equals, those cancel, AT. So now I've got a situation where I've got an A attached to a T by multiplication. The opposite of multiplication is, as you guessed it, division. So if I'm solving for the A, I got to get rid of the T, got to drop that. So I'm going to put a division sign here, divide by T, and divide this whole unit by T. Okay, so let's clean it up a little bit. First of all, the T's cancel on this side. I got A on this side. I'm going to just switch it around because I can. A is V minus V naught over T. Okay, because I got a T under there now. So you've got a new equation solving for A. Okay, guys, let's solve for T in that equation. So we've got a V is V naught plus A times T. Okay, so let's solve for our t. Okay, again, the t is multiplied by a, but it's attached to an initial velocity by addition. So let's subtract VO or V naught from both sides. Okay, so what that gives us is V minus V naught equals A times T. Okay, so now I've got an A attached to that T. If I'm still solving for T, I get an A multiplied by T. Guys, the opposite of multiplication is, you got it, division. So you're dividing by A and dividing by A. A over A is 1. Okay, and then you're left with T. So let's rearrange that, move it around a little bit, and clean it up for you. T is V minus V naught over A. Okay?